So what a privilege to have you all here. George, I thought we might start with you, if you don't mind introducing yourself first, and then talk a little bit about the journey you went on to make great progress at Kaiser Permanente.
I'm George Halvorson. I am just retired as chair and CEO of Kaiser Permanente at the beginning of January, and I'm now going down a path of working on some issues of racial conflict, ethnic conflict, and also early childhood development. So I'm working on some topics that I'm having a lot of fun with. At Kaiser Permanente, we have a massive commitment to diversity. We are a very diverse organization. When I got there, we were 49% minority. When I left, we were 59% minority. When you look at our senior officers, we have 8 regional presidents. Only 2 of them are white males. When you look at our 3 group presidents, we have 3 group presidents who run basic operations, and none of them are white males. And our chief financial officer is a woman, our controller. When you look at our overall performance as an organization, we are number 1 on Medicare, we're number 1 on J.D. Powers, we're number 1 on Consumer Reports. Every single measure of quality, we're at the top of the list. Every service measure, Consumer Reports that we're the best brand in healthcare. That's a company led by women. When you look at our board of directors, it's 40% white male. And so we have a very diverse organization. And one of the things you get when you have a very diverse organization is synergy. And you get synergy because people who look up the chain of command see somebody else who looks like them in the chain of command. And that's very empowering, particularly if you're a diverse organization. And is this working? Okay. One of the things that I've actually coached a number of CEOs from other companies, and they say, we love diversity, we're focused on diversity, we're committed to diversity, we're going to be very diverse. And then I say, okay, I've seen your annual report. I said, tell me this, if you right now, you personally went to another company that you really wanted to work for in a job you really wanted to have, and you got the annual report, and you looked at the annual report and you saw that every single person in the C-suite, the CFO, the CEO, the CMO, they're all black women. What do you think your chance would be of getting ahead in that company? And they say, oh, is that what it looks like? And I say, yeah, that's what it looks like. Look at your annual report and imagine that you are coming from any of the diverse parts of this organization. When they look at the senior level, it's clones. And if you look up at KP at the senior level, you can't find barely any layers where you've got 2, 3 people up in a chain of 5 that are the same race or ethnicity. And that works. When you create a synergy, when you focus on the patient, when you focus on the outcomes, when you focus on team care, when you organize the company as teams naturally create a synergy. And inside the teams, you ignore your prior issues of race and ethnicity and you focus on the patient. So team-based care focused on the patient is very, very empowering, and it gets people to look at a higher level and then move away from it. So at Kaiser Permanente, we basically made diversity a major agenda. We made women's issues a major agenda, and we have proven that an organization that has women senior leadership across the board not only does as well. And I'll end with the largest systems project in the history of the planet was, and any business on the planet was done at Kaiser Permanente, a $4 billion project. And one of my basic beliefs is that there are 2 organizational models that we have wired into us instinctively. One is the hunter model, and the hunter model is the hunter-warrior model, chain of command, task-oriented, get things done, heroes in the process. And the gatherer model, is collaborative, cooperative. You bring people together, you work in a collaborative way, and you figure out how to get things done in a collaborative model. Both of those processes are led. Both of those processes take leadership. It looks different. You don't see the leadership often in the collaborative model because part of the skill set is not to be in the spotlight. And on the hunter model, the major part of the skill set is to be in the spotlight so you get promoted. So when you've got both those models in today's complex world, you really need to gather a model. So the largest systems project in the history of the planet, KP Health Connect, we had Louise Liang come in and run it. And Dr. Liang was a White House fellow. She's very bright. She was chief operating officer for a couple hospital systems, but we put her in charge of that $4 billion project, and she delivered it on time by making it a collaborative project and bringing all the people together in a collaborative mode to get it done. And so you need, if I would have put someone in charge of that project who did it in a chain of command dictatorial model, it would have done like every other major systems project happens. It would have failed at multiple levels and cost us a lot of money. But because we had a brilliant leader who led with a collaborative model, we ended up getting it done. So that's kind of a Kaiser Permanente short story.
That's great. If I can follow up with one question.
Yeah.
Recently retired as the CEO and chairman of KP, and you've learned a lot, I suspect, over the course of that journey. If there was one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you started, what would that be?
And how far back are you going in that?
I'll leave that one to you.
Well, actually, I did not start as a collaborator. I did not start in my career as somebody who brought teams together. I started as a hunter model. I basically had chains of command. I gave orders. I directed people. And back in Minnesota, I ran a health plan that was a staff model health plan that looked like KP. And one of the women who was one of my department heads who put some clinics together and did some work for us, I did them all with great success. And so I trusted her and gave her bigger projects. And I gave her a project of moving 1,500, we built this magnificent new clinic, and we were moving 1,500 doctors from a couple different clinics into this new clinic, and we need to do it with no deterioration in patient care. So I signed her the project, and then came back a couple weeks later, and I said, okay, show me the plan. And she said, well, there really isn't one. And I said, show me the charts, show me, what, and she said, there isn't one. And I said, well, are you going to supervise this? And she said, I'll tell you what I've done. She said, I've gone to every department who's going to move. I've taken them all to the new site. I've shown them where they're going to be. And I said, each of you now plan your move and tell me what resources you need. She gave them a template to plan the resources. And they planned the resources off that template. And I said, well, what's the master list? How are you going to know if you're off? And she said, no, there is no master list. This is the model. And so we saw patients until noon on Friday. That whole process happened over the weekend. And we saw patients again at noon on Monday with no break. And it worked. And I converted. I said, holy cow. There's no possible way any part of my skill set could have made that happen. So then I started trying to learn how to be a collaborative leader from that point.
That's great. Thank you. Jimmy, we can switch over to you. You can introduce yourself. And one of the things, at least I've been told, is at PwC, you and the organization have really focused on leadership training, and would love to hear a bit about kind of the story and the journey from that point of view.
Sure, thanks. And thank you for repeating the question. I would have forgot. But so from my own perspective and why I'm here, for starters, I look at the progress and results over my working career and actually over my lifetime. And if you think about where we've been on this journey and just go back 5 decades, I don't think the pipeline has changed a whole lot, somewhat, but not a whole lot in terms of who's entering the workforce. And I think that's borne out in your statistics you showed, Eric. But we've made incremental progress, I think, in terms of women represented in the management and leadership and executive and board ranks. But we have so far to go, and it's just nowhere near the result that we should be seeing. So there's something that's just not working right. And I'm really interested in what we can do to try to accelerate progress, because I don't think that we've reached a plateau, but I don't think it's the right plateau to end on. So I'm hopeful that we'll make some breakthroughs, and be interesting to see what comes out of the conversation. As far as PwC and then what we've done to help to address women in the leadership ranks and leadership in general, I think it's a combination of building awareness within the firm of the issue. So starting with laying out the facts. You have a bunch of accountants to start with, and the business is quite different today. But when I started, it was mostly a bunch of accountants, so you're very rules and data based. So it's easy to get people's attention with facts and data, and then you help to build awareness about the why, what's driving that, and then the hard part is getting people to actually internalize and act on something and operate differently. So we focused a lot on the structures that we need to put in place, starting with tone at the top, role modeling, setting an example of what it takes to truly sponsor a diverse group of professionals into increasingly higher levels of responsibility. You can see it in our executive team. It's quite different than what it looked like 10, 20 years ago. We're now a third women in our U.S. leadership ranks. If you look at my own team in San Francisco, I'm the managing partner for our San Francisco market. And of the 7 people on my team, 5 are women, and I'm the only straight white male in the group. Now, the problem with that is I'm the one in charge of the office, but we work very much as a team, and one of my goals is that the succession list for my job includes a diverse set of individuals, all of whom are qualified to take on the role. When you look at the structures in PwC, a couple of comments there. Being an organization probably very similar to yours, Eric, it's partner owned and managed, and therefore a lot of driving change is dependent on alignment across a very broad set of stakeholders, and that's a bit of herding cats in a large organization. But you have to really get alignment on the objective. That's not hard to do on this topic, but then getting people to act on it, people generally respond to some clarity around rules and what it is we're trying to accomplish and how we get there. One of the things is every individual partner in our annual objectives lists a set, and it's a minimum of 3 individuals, diverse individuals, who we take personal responsibility for sponsoring into their next position of responsibility. And it's a very specific part of our evaluation, and it's equally weighted with all the other things that we do. And I think that's driven a lot of change as well. The other thing that we've done that gets to more of the personalization and kind of creating a real level of empathy is we've been training all of our people on implicit bias. And a lot of you, I'm sure, have seen some of the great work that was done by Dr. Banerjee, and we've actually used her in some of our own training classes for our leadership team. That's actually getting people to understand, what is it like on the other side. To George's example, I think that's the most powerful thing you can do, and probably the biggest change in my own perspective, because awareness was easy. I grew up in a family where I had 3 older sisters and a very strong mother who worked, and I always knew who was in charge, and was so that wasn't hard. But actually, when you get in positions where you can actually walk in somebody else's shoes and do it in a way where you can feel it, then I think that's transformative. And so that was probably my big awakening. But I think getting people to understand, what biases look like, and what does it feel like when you're putting yourself in someone else's shoes and you're in a meeting and you start hearing comments when we're evaluating women, and the comments start to sound like, this person's too aggressive, or this person isn't tough enough to make a decision or stand up for the firm in the boardroom, and you think, did I just hear that? And I think a lot of people, to just kind of open your mind and your heart to those things, just you don't really relate to the comments and act on them. So anyway, I'll pause there and move on.
This is great. Thank you. Just again, one follow-up. We heard a bit of George's kind of aha moment, right, when he learned to be a collaborative leader. What was your aha moment?
I think my biggest aha moment, and it is what I went through on that point of actually experiencing being in somebody else's shoes. And this was in a program in Atlanta when I lived there, and it was around racial issues. And I got into diversity. I grew up in a diverse environment, but I moved to Atlanta from San Jose, and had that. I was the one that raised their hand and said, "Why is it that inside our office. We don't look like the community that I live in. And so I took on some just leadership roles in the firm on that topic of racial disparity and trying to get our own firm to a point of proportionate representation with the community we lived in. Anyway, one of the programs I went through as part of that journey was a weekend of a deep immersion it was actually in the Leadership Atlanta program. And they took us, and it was an individual that grew up with a father who was on Dr. King's staff and took this group of kind of a mixed gender and mostly black and Caucasians and locked us up in a hotel room and we didn't know what the program was because it was a secret, but basically led us in without us knowing into a role-playing process. And the white people all ended up just absolutely mad, just pissed off about what was going on in this program, and we really didn't know until the second day what he was doing to us. But we came out of it, I won't go through the details, we actually came out of it with a very different level of understanding. What did that feel like to me? So anyway, I think that's important.
Great, thank you. Steve, if you don't mind starting the same way with a bit of an introduction and why you're excited to be here, and then maybe tell a bit of the journey at Sandia.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me to participate. I'm really glad to be here and to share our story and to hear the other stories as well. So I'm Steve Rottler, and I'm the Vice President for the California Laboratory for Sandia National Laboratories, which is based in Albuquerque, but we have quite a large operation here in California, and I'm responsible for that. I also manage one of what I think in the private sector would be recognized as a business unit. We think of it a little differently given that we're a nonprofit. And let's see, the reason this is so important to me and all of my colleagues at Sandia is that we're a nonprofit and a federally funded research and development center. And so for us, the most important thing at our laboratory is the people who work there. And in order to attract and retain some of the smartest people on the face of the planet for very long careers, which flies in the face of what most other organizations are able to do, but is very important for us in terms of the stability of our mission, the work environment is of paramount importance. And we made a commitment as an executive team, and now working it down through the laboratories 4 years ago, to take on once and for all the issues of diversity and inclusion that were creating some corrosion in our work environment. And the reason, for me personally, the reason this is so important is, and this begins to get to the journey issue as well, is about 4 years ago when we as an executive team agreed we were going to tackle this, we all made an agreement with each other that we were going to participate in a leadership development program that had been brought to our attention. There are many programs like this, so I won't name the program. But the focus of the program was around white male privilege and unconscious bias. And, when we talked about this inside the lab, first of all, when it became known that the executive team, the males, were going to go off to this thing called a white, I think the title of the course was White Man's Caucus. Immediately many in the lab said, and just what in the hell are you going to learn about diversity by a bunch of white males coming together in such a course? And, I had questions myself. And like most leadership development programs, you dread going because it's time away from the things that you think are most important. And then when you get there, you find it's very liberating and intellectually stimulating. And I would say I've been to many leadership development programs over my career. This, along with one other, I would say had the most profound effect on me because I was raised primarily by women. There are 3 women in my life that have had a huge impact on my development. In fact, I frequently say I am the man I am because of those 3 women. And I always have prided myself on being very open-minded and broad in my thinking. But I realized as I came out of this experience 4 years ago that I really thought of diversity and inclusion in overly simplistic ways, and actually in ways that were not helpful to the cause to which I was already intellectually committed, but maybe didn't quite understand how to fully engage as a leader. And this class that I took really helped me get past that. For example, this course, all these courses have frameworks, and this framework really spoke to me because it talked about white male privilege and unconscious bias in the context of how Western society developed, and to help white males understand where this came from. and to help white males understand that just by being a white male, you get certain privileges whether you realize it or not. You don't ask for them. Most white males don't ask for them, but you can't deny them either. You can't turn them down. It's not like you can walk away from them. You just get them by virtue of the fact that you're a white male. And then the course is built around 4 paradoxes. I won't share all 4 with you, but I am going to share 2 because for me, I carry them around every day and I talk about them regularly. The first one is, and this was very powerful, and that is, it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. So for me, that's when the light bulb clicked on for me as a leader. I never was too hung up on it wasn't my fault, but I use the it's not my fault and I live my life in a positive way as a way of saying, so therefore I'm done, right? I just have to keep doing that and I fulfilled my responsibility. But once I came to better understand the sociological factors in Western society, which is mostly what companies, both in the private sector and the public sector, are based on here in the United States, although that's changing. Once I came to understand that that's a reality and that I'm a leader in that environment, then it clicked for me that, yeah, right, it's not my fault. I was raised to be a good man. I believe I live my life as a good man. I believe I do all the things my mother and my grandmother and my wife have, ingrained in me over the years. But I can't escape the fact that as a leader in an organization, it is my responsibility to recognize that these things exist and to do something about them. So for me as a leader, I found that extremely energizing because then it didn't become something simplistic about numbers and how you recruit and all of that. That's important. But I began to see how I personally could get engaged both at the emotional level and using the power of my position and the resources I have available to me and my time and all of that. The second paradox, which had a profound impact on me once I understood it, was the paradox of sameness and difference. I was raised and spent a lot of time early in my life in Texas, which has a bundle of problems in this area, in my view, in their culture and in the society. I say that about my home state, which I love. But I was raised in an environment, the way I was taught about diversity was ignore differences, because if you pay attention to differences and you highlight them, then you're taking the step into the space of eventually being discriminatory. So I was taught to suppress differences. And for me, I look back on it now, I say it's such a simple concept, but I didn't grasp it when I went into this leadership development effort, is that you have to learn to live comfortably with the paradox of sameness and difference. Because at our core, we're all the same. We all want to be ourselves. We all want to be accepted as ourselves. We all want to bring the full measure of ourselves into any interaction, and especially at work. We don't want to live our lives at work differently than we live them when we're at home or with family and friends. So we're all the same in that regard, but we're also different. And it's our differences that make us unique. And that when I, as a leader or as a human being, suppress somebody else's difference from me, I am, in effect, sending them a signal, and it's a powerful signal if it comes from a leader. I am sending them a signal that I don't value their difference, that I don't recognize it, the thing that makes them unique, and the thing that they want to bring into the workplace. I'm sending them a tacit message that it's not okay, and that's not okay. So for me, those paradoxes, there were 2 others which I won't bore you with here, but for me it was a profound experience, and for me, it turned my commitment to diversity and inclusion into a very personal one that I connect with both morally and emotionally. The idea that in my institution, we would have even one employee out of the 11,000 smart people we employ who would feel that when they come to our place of work, that they couldn't be themselves, that they have to leave some piece of themselves in the parking lot to be picked up when they go home at night, taps a very strong emotional response for me. It's just, I can't stand it. And for me, it was at that moment that I said, okay, now I get as a leader, not only do I have this responsibility, but I'm energized by it and passionate about doing something about it. And that's why I'm here today.
Great, thank you. Then the paradoxes, I think, really, really ring true with all of us. As a leader, you have to acknowledge and face and fight some of the biases. Maybe describe some of the, if you will, the battles that you're fighting every day when it comes to these biases.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think given, I won't bore you with the details of our environment, but let me just say we have a very important technical mission. We hire, we hire some of the smartest people on the face of the planet. And so that's a privilege to go to work at a place like that every day. But it brings with it a bundle of things that make managing in a complex environment very difficult. Right? We get the advantage of working with really smart people, so once you connect with them intellectually, a lot of the bad stuff goes away and you get kind of what you want. But sometimes you have to get past a lot of baggage. Really smart people frequently are some of the most insecure people on the face of the planet. They can be a bundle of insecurities and oftentimes in ways that they hide very, very well. And you oftentimes don't know that that's what you're dealing with or that you've tapped into. I often find that some of the most talented people on the face of the planet are some of the most closed-minded people on the face of the planet because they're so smart. And they work through a problem and they get to a solution, and then it's about defending that solution, which means they're no longer open to other possibilities. And in the space that I live and work in, day in, day out, I don't do technical work anymore. I lead technical professionals. Space I deal in is very complex and it's very ambiguous and it's not prone to the use of the scientific method, at least to get successful solutions. So I think, I'm not answering this question very well, I feel, but for me, the challenge that I have is opening up the minds of the people who work for us. Another thing, Malin and I have one of my colleagues here with me today. Malin and I were talking about this on the way over here this afternoon. Our attrition rate at our lab, this is going to stun some of you, it's like 4% per year. I mean, it's very, I do 40-year anniversaries all the time. This is very, very common at our laboratory. When we get to 6% attrition rates, you just can't imagine the hand-wringing in our executive offices about the world is coming to an end, the lab is going into a really bad place. That's a real strength for us because we get talent, we get to keep it for a long, long time, we move people around a lot, we give them very challenging things to do. But what comes with that is when you have someone that's been at a place for a long time, especially working in the world we work in a frankly, Malin and I were talking about this too, a very favored place when you get right down to it. There are very few organizations that have what we have in terms of a mission and the kind of support that they get and the opportunity to do what we do. But what comes with that is over time you lose connection with the outside world. You lose that sense of calibration. You lose sight of the fact that the world has moved on. It's not like what it was when I came to the lab in 1985. And I find dealing with that to be a real challenge, especially in this space. Change is very hard to come at our laboratories. You can't mandate it. You can't direct it. It's a competency-based culture. The only way you get it is you have to connect with people's intellect, because until you connect with their intellect, there's no way their behavior will change. They'll just simply, at best, give you passive-aggressive buy-in, which gets you only a little bit until you turn your attention to other things, and then you don't have what you want.
So this is a question for all of you. I think Congresswoman Spire kind of pointed this out to us pretty clearly when she asked a few of us to raise our hands. And you look out, and it's quite startling, the percentage of women versus men in the audience. And so if we set an aspiration that when we got back together next year and had this same panel, and next year we wanted 50% of the audience to be men, what do you think we have to do to make that happen? Maybe, Jim, you can start.
Yeah, I would just start by those who are here. We have networks, we have responsibilities, and exercise our leadership and engage in our network and talk about the personal value we get out of this conversation and why it's an important topic.
George, do you want to?
Yeah, I think targeted marketing would make the most sense. Jim has membership list. He knows who the folks are. And if we communicated with those folks about the value of this particular meeting and why it would make sense to get them to the next year's meeting, I think that's the audience and might be the best mechanism.
I just had an idea in the moment, which means
I love those ideas.
Might not be a good one. And I tend to talk to think, so it may really be a bad idea. But I'm reflecting on my own experience. And Tracy and I were talking about this at the break, that, for me, I'm not sure I'd be where I am had I not had an opportunity to be just with a group of males to talk about this topic when I first had to really do a deep dive into it. Many males struggle with this issue of it's not my fault, but it's my responsibility. I knew when I went to that class, I knew it wasn't my fault. I was pretty confident it wasn't my fault, but I couldn't get to the other side to recognize, but it is my responsibility. And I needed, frankly, a safe environment where I could determine my own level. This is another thing I forgot to mention. This class I went to, a week-long, First night, first hour of people teaching it said, first rule, you choose your level of participation. We're not going to nag you. We're not going to call on you. We're not going to embarrass you. We're not going to put you on the spot. You choose the extent to which you're going to participate. I was telling Tracy at the break, for me, that's all I needed to hear, because then I wanted to participate. I couldn't participate fast enough because it was in my control. And I think a lot of males find this a very difficult topic to talk about in a mixed gender audience or mixed ethnicity audience, because many males are so conflicted about it. And maybe one thing that could be done to help increase the male participation, because it struck me too when I walked in. Mala and I were standing at the back of the room, and I said, what do you notice about the gender demographics? We both got it like that. One thing that might be helpful is to consider doing a session just for men, and find a way to get men to face some of these issues and what their responsibility as leaders are in helping deal with them in U.S. culture.
Yeah, just to add on quickly to that, one of the things we have done in PwC is started a set of meetings where we'll get a group of just men in our local offices, and facilitated by one of our diversity team members, and just have a conversation where you can put everything on the table. And one thing I was really proud to see is Moray, who's over here, who's our local CDO, told me who was going to be the leader within our office of this roundtable session for the men. And I started laughing, and she probably remembers. And I said, who's it really going to be? And the other reason I laughed is there's just one of our more senior males who's just a little bit quirky and points out things that other people don't see. And I never saw him as a champion for diversity, which was really interesting, and it made me think about, do I really know my partners, and am I asking the right questions if that was my reaction? But it led to a conversation with him about why is he interested in this, and so I think there's a real power in having a perceived safe environment for men to actually go and have this conversation and be honest with each other about it.
So I'll leave with one last thought, and then I'll thank the panelists. I think this notion of having the honest conversation is absolutely critical. I will say, personally, by framing it as the strategic question, at least in our firm, where you have an absolute obligation to weigh in on anything that is of strategic importance, right? You no longer can allow someone to back away from having it. And it invited everyone to participate with a very open and honest set of dialogues that I think are very much what you're both talking about.
My name's Jessica Lee. I'm from the Representation Project, and I work with a lot of corporate groups to screen our first documentary, Misrepresentation, as part of To Spark a Diversity Conversation. I often am speaking with a women's network, and they always ask me, how do we get men to come to the screening? And I'm wondering, hearing what you're saying just now, about whether the employee resource group as the organizer is actually siloed the conversation, and that we're just not going to get men in the room, even if they invite them, as long as it's a women's network. So help me get more men to see our film.
This is just a bit of a quick story that may or may not help you. But we just took all 85 or 90 of our partners from the West Coast to a 3-day offsite where this topic, we spent an hour and a half on this topic, by the way, pretty unexpectedly. When I listed the priorities for the year, and this is one of them, we went into the most open and honest dialogue that I've ever been part of, quite frankly, thanks to one of our women partners who said, guys, you're not getting it. And then we went into a fascinating session where we invited all of our women partners and all the male partners to a fireside chat that we were going to videotape and actually share with all of our non-partners. And by the way, we knew there was going to be a cocktail hour or happy hour that our women were going to go to. We didn't actually know that we were invited. And when someone asked, well, why do you always have these sessions that we're not invited to? They said, well, let me explain what we're doing, and you're absolutely invited. And we had standing room only, right? And so it was about the invitation, but it was about the invitation from, right, and telling them what you're trying to achieve that really made the difference for us.
Thank you for this great panel. I'm Roberta Guys. I develop women as thought leaders. So in the last year or so, Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, came out, and it's been in the women's chatosphere. I'm just curious if men have been thinking about it, talking about it, relating to it, and whether it's started to trigger any conversations in corporations. Thank you.
Yeah, I have to say the answer is I'm not familiar with the book, and so I can't really offer a comment.
I've heard the book mentioned in a number of settings, but it's not triggering any kind of organized or significant contact. Some of her television interviews, I think, have been had some impact, and so I've heard more comments about the television, but not so much about the book. I've heard a couple of people mention the book, but and not entirely positively, actually, in terms of disagreements about whether or not. And I haven't read the book, so just answering your question.
It does. So that would then, I think, raise the question about how do we engage men's curiosity around this subject?
So I read the book, and we had our CEO on stage with Cheryl at Facebook and invited a mix, and I was really happy to see it was a very blended mix of men and women from different businesses around the area to just an auditorium to talk. And it was a bit of back and forth between the two of them about some of the points raised in the book. The book, when I talk to colleagues, does seem to be controversial, probably more controversial with women than with men, which is interesting. And but I think it's starting a conversation. And I think men are confused in some ways that I've talked to about what the real message is there, and then what's the call to action for men. But I do think the examples that she gave about her own career in the book and about other relationships with her family, when you read those and understand those stories, most of those each one of us can relate to and say, I've seen that happen before. And so I think those examples are really powerful.
I'm actually currently writing a book. I write books is one of the fun things I do. And I'm currently writing a book about instinctive behaviors, patterns of behavior. That we instinctively tribalize, we instinctively create hierarchies, we instinctively divide into us and them and treat people differently based on us and them. We instinctively create turf. We have a whole series of instinctive behaviors we have, and when you look at the patterns of instinctive behavior, it's pretty easy to figure out what's going on in organizational settings, because all organizations reflect the patterns established by our instincts, and our cultures tend to be the toolkit that we use to actualize the goals of the instincts. So we have instincts to have matrimony, and so every culture invents their own rules of matrimony. So the book is about the various patterns we have and basically how we can use those patterns more effectively to get along, understand each other. And one of the chapters is on the incredible negative behavior that we have exhibited against women. The prejudice, the discrimination, the oppression, the suppression, that book is that chapter I've written about 7 times now, and it depresses me, because you look at the horrible, horrible things we do in so many cultures, in so many settings relative to women. I just got back from Saudi Arabia, and in Saudi Arabia I was in a room with a couple hundred doctors from the Ministry of Health, and the women in the room had to sit in the back of the room, and they had to be completely and totally covered. And when they came up afterward to have their picture taken with me, they had to have complete covering on to have their picture taken. They couldn't even, and that was these are physicians in the Ministry of Health in Saudi Arabia. And there are parts of the world where things are so negative relative to women, and when you look at the patterns of that behavior. So hopefully when I figure out that chapter and get it done, it will be useful. And my goal on that chapter is to start a dialogue. My goal is to get a conversation going where people can talk openly about these issues and talk about how really bad those behaviors are in so many settings and have been for such a long time.
Yeah, I want to call one issue. We don't really have time to discuss it because we've already overused your generosity. And one, I just want to thank you that you're the men we've been waiting for. And yeah. So thank you. Thank you for your own work, your own journey, and the work that you've done on yourselves. But this issue always brings us back to the fundamental issue of power. And you talked about privilege. And, I tried to wrap my head around this in a very simple way. And it occurred to me that one of the simplest ways to see it is that I'm a member of, I'm a platinum or whatever I am, frequent flyer with United. And when I go to the airport, I love that I have privilege. I love that I get to go to the front of the line. I love that I, can sit in the red carpet room. And if they suddenly changed that rule and said, nope, it's first come, first serve and all that, I would be annoyed. So that's how I personalized it. So I wonder for you, in your closing comments, after I know Rufus has a question, but what about power? Because, it's really seductive. It's really a tough one to share. And I got to think that given the thousands of years we've been at work on this issue, that's at the heart of it. And so how do you make sharing power attractive or compelling?
I'll give a quick reaction. I think you're making an assumption there. And one of the definitions of privilege when you talk about diversity and about white males is the privilege is in the assumptions that people make about us and the assumptions that we make about them, and the fact that white males generally don't have to think about some things that a lot of other people do about what you say and how it's going to be perceived, or a lot of other behavioral things. We just go about our dumb white guy lives in joyful ignorance. And that's a privilege when you understand that. But the power comment, the assumption that I referred to is power is probably relative. And a lot of men probably don't express in a vulnerable way that their insecurities. And in a lot of organizations, we may look to somebody else. People may assume that we are very comfortable and confident in our power. We probably look to a lot of other people and think, wow, that person really has arrived, or I would like to be that person. But somehow we've been trained to have a veneer that that's not apparent to you. So I would just say don't. I have power, I guess, from the standpoint about being privileged around the assumptions, but I don't think of myself as having power.
I'd like to build on that comment, and it goes back to the question that was asked over here as well, because you asked a question that we didn't really answer, which is how do you get men more curious? And I don't have a great answer for the question, but I do have an answer, and that is that in my experience, in my little slice of the world, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Every male is a little different. And I'm sure I don't experience it very often, at least I don't believe I do, but perhaps this is a part of my unconscious bias, right? Something I don't see as a white male. I don't experience the misuse of power, or the abuse of power, or the unwillingness to relinquish power. I experience much more what Jim described. But I'm confident that it exists somewhere, right? I'm confident that that happens. So I'm not denying it. But I did want to say that I think when you think about how to approach men and how to get them interested in this, it's not easy. There's no one size fits all. It's not a book or an article. It's not a film. It's not a seminar. You have to understand the people you're trying to reach and approach them in a way that they're reachable. For me, it was going to that class. Now, I didn't know that going in. I think my colleagues, when we all agreed to do it, males and females, we didn't know what we were going to get from it, so maybe I just got lucky. But I've observed, as we've now encouraged most of our center directors to go through this, it's a mixed success rate. Some go and they come out as energized as I am. But right now, I'm still mentoring a couple of white males who went to the class and came out nothing other than very, very angry white males. So, it's about, I'm trying to do the mind meld with them to understand how do I reach those individuals. One, I know. He's a PhD scientist. He needed facts. He needed numbers. He needed a hard business case, where I needed something more emotional, right? Something that got me, here. So that, that's the answer I have to yours and to your question.
Yeah, my sense is that the power issue is a little bit like the privilege issue, and it's visible to the people who don't have it, but it's not necessarily visible or relevant to the people who do have it. It's just sort of assumed. So people aren't really working to maintain power because they don't even realize they have power. But if you don't have power, it's pretty obvious who does. And so I think that's part of the context issue. And the other thing is I do think, back to I love your analogy of the airline status. What we need to do to solve this is not to take away your status. What we need to do is increase everybody's status so that everybody has that same level of service. And I think that's the outcome that we've got to get to.
Thank you all. It's been wonderful.